A woman is 8 months pregnant when her amniotic fluid suddenly breaks, yet instead of staying safely at home, she insists on going into the forest to give birth. Her mother-in-law turns pale with shock. A violent storm is raging outside, and stepping out now is almost the same as walking toward death. She is forcibly held down on the bed and made to deliver the baby at home. After a heart-wrenching scream, the child is finally born. But strangely, her belly remains unnaturally swollen. The mother-in-law instantly realizes she is carrying twins. However, those words completely shatter the woman. With terror written across her face, she cries out that this second child should not exist. Today's story is about the film Hamlet. It is a story about a mother, death, and creation. It is also the cruelest and most truthful origin story behind one of the greatest works ever written. The woman at the center of this story is Agnes. Her mother and grandmother both came from the forest. Women who entered this world with an uncanny sense of foresight. They married the men they loved, had children, and passed their rare gift down from generation to generation. Agnes inherited everything from her mother perfectly. The first time she laid eyes on Will, she already knew he would be her future husband. But her stepmother strongly opposed the relationship and complained to Agnes's brother, saying Agnes could no longer be allowed to wander freely in the forest. Her brother said nothing. He understood Agnes's abilities and did not want to interfere with what he already knew was coming. When Will found Agnes again and tried to confess his love, she rejected him, but not without giving him a chance. She asked him to tell her a story, one that could truly move her. Will told her the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus was the greatest musician in all of Greek mythology, and he and his wife Eurydice loved each other with their whole hearts. But not long after their wedding, Eurydice was bitten by a venomous snake in the forest and died. Overwhelmed with grief, Orpheus carried his lyre down into the underworld itself. His music moved the rulers of the dead so deeply that they granted him permission to bring his wife back, but on one condition: he must not look back at her before they had fully left the underworld. As Will told the story, Agnes reached out and touched him, and in that touch, she saw something inside him that she had never encountered before, a hidden world unlike anything she had ever known. There were mountains, rivers, and vast oceans, breathtaking landscapes that stretched without end. The richness of his inner world was extraordinary, and it shaped the man standing before her completely. Will was deeply moved by her reaction. Before Agnes, everyone had only ever seen his outward appearance, a glovemaker's son whose only remarkable quality was knowing a few foreign words. But Agnes opened the door to an entirely new world for him, and from that moment, his inspiration began to flow without stopping. They came together without parental approval or formal arrangements, driven solely by an unstoppable love as they moved through the dense forest. Will believed he would eventually find a way to convince his family to accept Agnes as his wife. But one day when he returned home, he found Agnes already sitting in his family's living room. Not only did Will's family disapprove, even Agnes's own brother looked confused. His sister clearly had better choices available to her, so why choose a pale and frail scholar? Agnes, in that moment, was completely absorbed in happiness. She was unaware of what kind of life this decision would bring her. She wanted no elaborate wedding or romantic ceremony. She simply put on a white dress and walked toward the man she loved. Not long after their marriage, Agnes felt her first child preparing to be born. Following her mother's method, she walked alone into the forest when the time came. At the entrance of a mysterious cave, accompanied by the mournful buzzing of wild bees, she gave birth to her eldest daughter, Susanna. When Will and her brother finally found her, Agnes was sitting there holding the baby with a radiant smile of complete happiness. Gentle rains soaked the earth around them, but Will could not share fully in her joy. He was going through the most painful transformation of his life. The slow, difficult change from a carefree boy who had never worried about the world to a man who now had to support an entire family. The cries of the baby in the room and the endless gloves he had to make for his father's shop left him restless and deeply agitated. He could not see his future. He felt trapped. This was not the life he wanted. Late at night, he would sit alone at the table, trimming the pen in his hand. He longed to write with brilliance, to craft immortal works with extraordinary words. But this place held him back. Even Agnes's gentle comfort could no longer reach him. Agnes understood his pain completely. She knew that Will should not be confined here. He needed to go to a broader world and discover the full depth of his inner self. She went to her brother and asked him to step in and persuade Will's father to allow Will to leave for London. On the day of his departure, Agnes said nothing. She simply sat quietly, prepared medicinal herbs for emergencies, and gently pushed him out the door. This was the wisdom of a woman who truly saw people clearly. When a man hesitates before stepping out towards something greater, someone always needs to give him that final push. After Will left, Agnes continued her life as before. When her second child was about to be born, she prepared her own delivery tools and planned once again to go into the forest. But her mother-in-law stopped her and refused to let her leave no matter what. Trapped at home, Agnes gave birth safely to a baby boy. But when she was told there was still another child inside her, she completely panicked. Her intuition had always told her she was only meant to have 2 children. For the first time in her life, she began to doubt herself. She thought of her own mother, who had died during childbirth. Had her mother's premonition also been wrong? Was that why she left so early, leaving behind a lonely child to face the world alone? There was no familiar sound of a baby crying, only a deathly silence. The newborn daughter died shortly after birth. Agnes was filled with shock. She reached out and forcefully took the child back, holding her tightly in her arms, insisting that her baby was still alive. And then, in the warmth of her embrace, the little girl suddenly moved. Her pale body slowly began to regain color. Agnes cried tears of overwhelming joy. In that fragile, impossible moment, the tiny life in her arms became her only salvation. Time moved quickly. The once fragile infants grew into mischievous, lively children. Agnes's son Hamlet and her daughter Judith, twins who had come into the world together under the most terrifying circumstances, loved to swap clothes and make the family guess who was who. Even though they looked completely different, Will always pretended not to recognize them, just to see them laugh. The traditions of Agnes's family continued. She carefully taught her ancestral remedies to her 2 daughters, holding nothing back. Meanwhile, Hamlet followed behind Will like a little swordsman, imagining the whole world was his stage. Will had by now found steady work in a theater troupe in London. His scripts were highly appreciated, and his income gradually became stable. But Agnes always refused to take the children to the city. Will understood why. Because of the difficult circumstances of her birth, Judith had always been physically weaker than other children. As autumn approached, Agnes sensed that Judith would fall seriously ill. A deep unease settled over her. She feared constantly that her daughter would not survive the coming winter. Happy moments are always brief and filled with partings. When Will left once again, Hamlet felt so upset that he burst into tears. He had always dreamed of working alongside his father and playing a handsome swordsman on stage. Agnes could see his future, and so she did not worry about that. The only thing she worried about, still and always, was Judith's health. As the cold, damp air spread from the river into the streets, a plague was quietly brewing. Death was preparing to sweep through and claim many lives. One day, Hamlet ran home excitedly, only to find Judith lying sick in bed. By the time Agnes returned, the situation had already become severe. Judith was burning with a high fever, and countless swollen lumps had appeared on her neck. The whole family gathered around her, trying every possible method to drive the illness away. Agnes stubbornly poured medicine into her daughter's mouth, hoping desperately that it would work, but Judith kept her eyes tightly shut throughout. Even after Agnes worked tirelessly until midnight, the fever would not come down. The mother-in-law walked over and urged Agnes to give up. The plague had once taken the lives of 3 of her own children, and she understood that pain all too well. She also understood that in the face of death, everyone is equal. Even the ancestral remedies passed down through generations could not change what was already being decided. In the middle of the night, Hamlet woke up. The deep bond between the twins told him that Judith's life was slipping away. He walked to her bedside in tears, as if he could see death approaching with his own eyes. He did not know what to do. After hesitating for a long moment, he thought of the game he and Judith often played together. He repeated it over and over, that he would give his life to her. As the only boy in the family, Hamlet had long carried the quiet responsibility of looking after his sisters. When death drew near, if there was any regret left in his heart, it was only that he could not see his father one last time. The next morning, Agnes woke in shock. Judith's fever had broken, but Hamlet had collapsed. Looking at the 2 children lying before her, Agnes instantly understood everything. Her premonition had not been wrong. Before she died, only 2 children would remain by her side. The third, the one she had felt should never have existed, had always been living on borrowed time. She had simply never known which one it would be. Unwillingness and despair crashed into her heart at the same time. Agnes picked up the bowl of medicine again. She called frantically for her family to bring more remedies. She had never been this panicked, this disorganized, this helpless before. Hamlet's painful groans struck her like a heavy hammer, leaving her completely overwhelmed. She had never believed in gods. But at this moment, holding her trembling son in her arms, Agnes wished with everything inside her that she could trade her own life for his. As Hamlet's convulsions grew worse, his voice faded, his hands fell limp. He died in Agnes's arms. Agnes's world completely collapsed. If life is destined to carry such unbearable pain, she murmured to herself, then why do people come into this world at all? Her son was gone, but she could not cry. When sorrow reaches its absolute peak, there are no tears left. With the help of her mother-in-law, Agnes prepared Hamlet's body. As layer after layer of white cloth was wrapped around him, Judith walked down the stairs and revealed what had happened that night. She believed she had caused Hamlet's death by existing, but Agnes knew the truth. That night, it would have been either Hamlet or Judith. This was fate, and she had no power to argue against it. When Will returned and saw his son's cold body, he was on the verge of breaking down. This time, Agnes did not step forward to comfort him. She was not angry at Will for failing to return in time. What she truly ached for was the despair her son had felt that night, struggling alone in the dark without ever seeing his father's face one last time. It was Agnes herself who had pushed Will to leave for London. She had never regretted that decision, but she could not forgive herself on her son's behalf. What she never expected was that Will would not stay home for long before leaving again for work. Agnes swallowed all her grief and stood back up without saying a single word to make him stay. Later, Will tried everything to reach her again. He offered a new house, a precious jeweled bracelet, and held out his sincere heart in the hope of bringing back the Agnes he once knew. But Hamlet's death had taken half of Agnes's soul with it. She could no longer love Will with her whole heart. When she held his hand again, she saw nothing. The man who had once told her stories in the forest had vanished. Will returned to London. One night, listening to actors rehearse their lines, he suddenly flew into a rage. Late that night, he went to the riverside, thinking of ending his life. Yet the bright moon above was suddenly swallowed by dark clouds, light and shadow shifting in an instant. Amid his overwhelming pain, he felt the world he had once possessed collapsing rapidly. And then, from the ruins of that collapse, a resilient flower began to bloom. 1 year after Hamlet's death, William Shakespeare created the masterpiece he had always longed to write. But if suffering was truly the soil of literature, he would rather have never written a single word. He would rather have never composed those soul-stirring lines. Their old home had been emptied. Agnes held the key to the new house, but felt herself drifting further and further from the forest, from everything that had once made her who she was. Agnes became quiet and withdrawn, until one day her stepmother came to tell her that Will had written a new play, and it had become the talk of the entire town. Agnes handed it casually to Susanna without even glancing at the title, a name that differed from her son's by only one letter. Accompanied by her brother, Agnes eventually went to Will's studio in London. He had earned a considerable fortune by then, yet he still chose to live in a small attic, because that attic was where they had begun. If life feels uncertain, it is better to open your heart than let it remain closed in darkness. Agnes suddenly understood something. Once she began to harbor resentment, she was destined to be consumed by it sooner or later. On the night that Hamlet premiered, Agnes walked into the theater with the crowd. On the stage, she saw a forest with a dark void at its center. She sensed faintly that this story was connected to her. Then the ghost, played by Will himself, appeared, and she heard them speak the name Hamlet. Agnes could no longer contain herself. She cried out that they must not speak her son's name. Pain should neither be buried nor dragged out and exposed again and again under the light. The people around her did not yet understand what this play was truly about, until the actor playing Hamlet stepped onto the stage. His features clearly resembled what Hamlet might have looked like. Grown up, Agnes's gaze became entranced as she followed his every movement, trying desperately to memorize what her son might have become as an adult. When Will appeared again on stage, her eyes filled with tears. In that moment, time overlapped. She felt as if she truly saw Hamlet and Will performing together, father and son, in the same light, on the same stage at last. It was so beautiful and so heartbreaking. This was no longer just a play. Hidden within it was the sorrow of separation between a father and a son, the endless struggle between life and death, a father's deep, wordless longing for a child he had lost. Will had taken the dreams his son never had the chance to fulfill and brought them onto the stage. He had borrowed his son's name and shaped it into a fearless prince, a boy who carried a brave heart and a tragic fate that stirred compassion in every heart that watched. The young Hamlet stood against the entire world and never retreated. When the final duel arrived, Hamlet struck his enemy again and again, drawing waves of cheers from the audience. But the hidden attack from behind filled everyone with dread. In the end, the brave prince was poisoned and faced death. Agnes reached out her hand instinctively, and then, around her, countless other hands reached out as well, as if every person in that theater had become Hamlet's mother in that moment, reaching toward him, passing on his unyielding spirit through their open palms. Hamlet fell, yet countless people would remember his name, remember his revenge, remember his courage, remember the single tear that fell before his death. And then, the small figure of Hamlet appeared on stage. He turned and looked directly at Agnes. He shed a reluctant tear, and then he walked slowly into the darkness. At that moment, art was complete. Hamlet stands as the greatest achievement of Western Renaissance literature, yet the world only remembers Hamlet. No one remembers the real child, the 11-year-old boy named Hamnet.